The Midnight Zone, spanning depths between 1,000 and 4,000 meters, represents one of Earth's least understood biological frontiers. Light never reaches this region. The water pressure exceeds the limits of most engineered structures. Temperatures hover near freezing. Currents move with glacial subtlety, and life persists only through adaptations that defy conventional biological expectations. For centuries, the Midnight Zone remained a theoretical space, an abyss into which no tool, vessel, or hypothesis could reliably extend. Only recently, through a loose collection of deep-sea expeditions, autonomous probes, and accidental recordings, has the zone revealed fragments of the organisms inhabiting it. What emerged from that darkness was not merely surprising, it was profoundly unsettling. Early encounters came not through visual confirmation, but through disturbances recorded by deep ocean sensing arrays. These disturbances included sudden changes in acoustic absorption, unexplained shifts in density layers, and anomalous fluctuations in bioluminescent fields. The anomalies suggested the presence of large, dynamic organisms capable of manipulating their environment in ways no known species could replicate. The earliest confirmed evidence of one such creature came from a deep-diving, remotely operated vehicle investigating the edge of a mid-ocean ridge. The probe's cameras captured a roiling distortion in the water column, accompanied by a spreading cloud of particulate matter. The distortion moved with deliberate rhythm, as though propelled by massive, flexible structures hidden beneath the layers of darkness. When the probe's lights penetrated the haze, faint illumination revealed a segmented surface lined with reflective patches. The patches appeared metallic but shifted with organic fluidity, absorbing and redirecting light in unnatural patterns. Subsequent analysis of the footage suggested that these reflective structures belonged to a creature whose anatomy diverged sharply from known taxa. Rather than smooth organic tissue or chitinous plating, the segments exhibited properties similar to layered mineral composites. These composites appeared to function as armor, sensory arrays, and energy reflectors simultaneously. The structure's complexity implied a lineage shaped by evolutionary pressures entirely distinct from those governing surface ecosystems. This organism became the first of many unsettling discoveries. A second species emerged in recordings captured near a pelagic drop-off, where the continental shelf plunged abruptly into abyssal depths. The recordings showed a massive, undulating sheet drifting through the water with near-perfect neutral buoyancy. Its surface shimmered with faint internal luminescence that pulsed in slow, deliberate intervals. The pulses traveled across its body in branching patterns, resembling electrical discharges trapped within translucent membranes. The creature exhibited no identifiable limbs, segments, or appendages. Instead, it shifted form gradually, folding and unfolding like a living veil. The membrane's structure baffled marine biologists. Under normal conditions, tissue of such thinness would collapse under extreme pressure. Yet the organism maintained its integrity effortlessly. Spectral analysis suggested that its internal luminescence served as more than mere illumination. The light patterns followed coherent sequences, possibly indicating sensory processing or environmental scanning. Some propose that the creature interpreted pressure waves and chemical gradients through optical feedback embedded directly into its tissues. Its presence prompted a re-evaluation of what body structure could mean at these depths. Other species revealed themselves not through footage, but through environmental disruptions that could only be explained by biological activity. One such organism, nicknamed the abyssal displacer in internal reports, generated sudden shifts in density fields extending hundreds of meters. These shifts created pockets of unusually warm or cold water that moved independently of known currents. Instruments recorded these anomalies as migrating corridors of altered temperature and salinity, sometimes forming perfect concentric rings or elongated spirals. The exact nature of the abyssal displacer remains unknown. It leaves no visible trace, no physical residue, and no acoustic signature. Instead, its presence is inferred from the environmental distortions it produces. Some researchers believe it is capable of manipulating internal heat reservoirs to control water density, possibly as a defense mechanism or a predatory strategy. Others suspect it may be a gaseous or semi-fluid organism able to displace vast water volumes without leaving a coherent trace. The most disturbing theory posits that the organism exists partially within subsurface layers, an entity navigating both water and sediment as though the boundary between them did not exist. Further observations brought attention to a species known only from 3 ultra-rare recordings, a serpentine silhouette extending for dozens of meters through the blackness. Unlike shallow-water serpentine creatures, this entity moved without undulation. Its body remained perfectly straight as it glided, propelled by forces that produced no detectable water displacement. The lack of mechanical motion suggested propulsion methods unrelated to muscle contraction. Some proposed electrokinetic locomotion, others suspected control over buoyancy gradients through micropressure zones. The silhouette's surface reflected no light. Instead, it absorbed illumination entirely, creating an abyssal void within the surrounding darkness. When the organism passed near a dive platform, every light sensor registered a complete blackout despite direct illumination. Pressure readings indicated a massive object displacing huge volumes of water, yet it left no turbulence, no wake, and no acoustic footprint. Its presence resembled a moving absence. Perhaps the most unnerving organisms identified in the Midnight Zone belong to a category researchers call structural mimetics. These creatures exhibit forms indistinguishable from geological features. Some appear as motionless pillars embedded in sediment. Others mimic loose debris or collapsed vent remnants. Their camouflage is so precise that traditional imaging equipment cannot distinguish them from inanimate formations. Only when these structures shift contracting, elongating, or folding inward does their true nature become evident. One such mimetic was discovered during a mapping mission attempting to chart the contours of a collapsed vent field. As the mapping drone passed overhead, what appeared to be a large basalt column suddenly disassembled into a cluster of flexible appendages. The appendages reoriented the entire mass, propelling it upward before disappearing into the blackness. Review of the footage revealed that the organism had remained perfectly inert until disturbed, its outer layers composed of mineralized tissue that replicated the appearance of volcanic rock with near-perfect fidelity. This level of environmental integration suggested a survival strategy adapted to extreme predation or extreme patience, possibly both. Another species, documented indirectly, reshaped sediment layers in vast circular formations. These patterns, sometimes spanning hundreds of meters, appeared overnight, leaving the seafloor rearranged with geometric precision. The formations resembled concentric spirals carved into the substrate, each ring composed of alternating ridges and troughs. No organism was captured in the act, but pressure sensors detected a massive force passing across the sediment, displacing it with coordinated pulses that formed the intricate designs. The aesthetic complexity of the formations raised questions about their purpose. The patterns may serve as feeding structures, thermal traps, acoustic amplifiers, or reproductive constructs. Their precision indicated an advanced biological capacity to manipulate the environment across broad spatial scales. Toward the lower boundary of the Midnight Zone, recordings captured yet another category of organism entities defined by perpetual bioluminescent storms. These creatures emitted continuous flickering patterns that spread across their surfaces like waves of electricity. The patterns shifted according to proximity to pressure changes, chemical plumes, and sediment movement. They responded to their environment with immediate, coordinated light displays resembling neural activity externalized across a body composed entirely of translucent tissue. If these light patterns represent sensory processing or communication, they may constitute a distributed nervous system spread across the organism's entire structure. The concept of cognition expressed through luminescent chemical cycles challenges every foundational assumption in comparative biology. These species represent only a fraction of the organisms documented in the Midnight Zone. Many remain known only through indirect inference disturbances in currents, deviations in bioluminescent distributions, unexplained shifts in particulate density, and sudden disappearances of entire microbial colonies. Together, they portray an ecosystem defined not by scarcity, but by specialized complexity. The Midnight Zone is not barren. It is an arena of adaptation so extreme that they resemble distortions of biology itself. If the shallow ocean reflects life's surface narrative, the midnight zone represents a parallel evolution, one driven by darkness, pressure, and the slow rhythm of geological time. And the deeper researchers probe, the clearer it becomes that the most terrifying creatures of the midnight zone are not frightening because they are hostile or predatory. They are terrifying because they embody forms of life shaped by conditions humans were never meant to witness. Creatures evolved for an environment that rejects all light, all warmth, and all human presence. The deeper the investigations penetrated into the midnight zone, the more apparent it became that traditional biological frameworks were insufficient to describe the organisms encountered there. The creatures inhabiting this region did not conform to expected structures, metabolic processes, or ecological roles. Instead, they displayed adaptations that blurred the distinction between organism, environment, and geological mechanism. Their behaviors reflected rhythms not tied to seasonal cycles or predator-prey dynamics, but to the slow, tectonic cadence of the planet itself. One of the most perplexing species recorded during deep-sea surveys was identified through a series of abrupt, coordinated interruptions in chemical sensor arrays. The sensors, positioned across a broad expanse of abyssal plain, logged simultaneous depletions of dissolved metals within a narrow corridor. This corridor extended for kilometers, progressing steadily eastward. The uniformity of the depletion indicated a biological process rather than geological absorption. Further analysis revealed that the metals removed primarily iron, manganese, and cobalt aligned with known requirements for chemosynthetic metabolic pathways. Although no visual confirmation was ever recorded, researchers inferred the presence of a massive filter-feeding organism capable of extracting trace metals from water on an unprecedented scale. The corridor's edges exhibited subtle turbulence patterns, suggesting a body composed of flexible membranes arranged in repeated cycles of expansion and contraction. These membranes might have functioned as absorption surfaces, capable of processing immense volumes of water with extraordinary efficiency. If accurate, the organism's scale would surpass that of any known filter feeder, implying an energy budget sustained entirely by chemical extraction rather than predation. A related phenomenon emerged when hydrophones detected low, oscillating pulses emitted from a region devoid of significant geological activity. These pulses, spaced at regular intervals, appeared to originate from a stationary object. When autonomous vehicles approached, they recorded faint, shimmering distortions inconsistent with heat or pressure fluctuations. Instead, the distortions resembled microscopic displacements of particulate matter in geometrically aligned patterns. The patterns cohered into rippling waves that extended outward in symmetrical arcs. This phenomenon led to the hypothesis of a pressure architect, an organism capable of generating stable standing waves in the water column. The waves formed physical structures invisible to the eye but measurable through density changes. These structures might serve as feeding traps, environmental modifiers, or sensory nets capable of amplifying faint signals. The ability to manipulate pressure with such precision implied a biological mechanism equivalent to an internal acoustic engine capable of producing sustained harmonic outputs. No known species demonstrated such capabilities. Another organism, identified only through high-speed current anomalies, displayed behavior inconsistent with any conventional form of locomotion. Sensors recorded sudden directional shifts in deep currents, forming narrow jets of accelerated water that propagated for hundreds of meters before dissipating. The jets appeared spontaneously and moved in directions that did not correspond to topographical gradients. Their velocity suggested propulsion by a massive body moving at speeds unattainable for known deep-sea species. The absence of turbulence implied a propulsion mechanism based on controlled manipulation of buoyancy or pressure fields. Some analysts proposed that the organism maintained internal gas or fluid reservoirs capable of rapid compression and release. By cycling pressure through these reservoirs in coordinated pulses, the creature might generate thrust without relying on external movement. This method of locomotion would produce minimal hydrodynamic disruption, rendering the organism nearly undetectable until highly sensitive sensors registered the effects of its movement on surrounding currents. Near the lower boundary of the midnight zone, where the abyss transitions into the Hadal depths, researchers identified a species whose presence was discernible only through its reaction to chemical gradients. Instruments monitoring vent activity recorded sudden collapses in microbial populations coinciding with unexplained surges in sulfur and methane consumption. In several cases, entire microbial mats vanished within hours. The disappearance patterns did not match those caused by predators or environmental collapse. Instead, they followed sweeping arcs consistent with the path of a large organism grazing across the vent ecosystem. The organism hypothesized from these observations might be a specialized chemical harvester, an entity evolved to consume chemosynthetic biomass across a broad range. The speed and scale of the population collapses suggested an organism with a vast feeding surface, perhaps composed of thousands of microscopic intake structures, capable of absorbing dissolved chemicals and biological matter simultaneously. This species, if it existed, would represent one of the most dominant consumers in the vent food web, operating with an efficiency that left nothing behind. One of the most visually striking organisms, albeit observed only twice, was the so-called mirror shroud entity. Both sightings came from autonomous vehicles equipped with high-intensity illumination systems. In each instance, the light revealed a vast curtain-like structure hanging in the water column, extending dozens of meters vertically. The surface of the curtain reflected light not diffusely, but with perfect specular accuracy, behaving like a mirror suspended in darkness. As the vehicle approached, the reflection distorted, revealing subtle ripples that moved against the current. These ripples indicated internal muscular tension distributed across a broad membrane. Spectral analysis of the reflected light suggested that the surface was composed of a thin film of metallic microscales arranged in fractal patterns. These scales shifted in response to illumination, allowing the organism to manipulate its appearance dynamically. When the vehicle increased its light output, the curtain folded inward and vanished into the dark, reflecting nothing but void. Such adaptive camouflage surpassed known biological capabilities, suggesting a form of environmental control that allowed the organism to remain undetected at will. Perhaps the most bewildering of the Midnight Zone's inhabitants are the interference swarms clusters of microscopic organisms that move as a collective entity, forming coherent structures capable of affecting sonar, magnetics, and light. These swarms behave as if driven by a unified purpose, arranging themselves into shifting configurations that mimic the presence of a larger organism. Some swarms form tubular corridors around passing objects. Others assemble into geometric shapes resembling spirals or lattices. They have been recorded dispersing explosively in response to sudden changes in chemical composition, only to reassemble minutes later. Scientific speculation suggests that these swarms might constitute distributed organisms, life forms in which individual units serve as modular components of a larger biological system. Their ability to form and dissolve structures at will implies communication mechanisms beyond chemical signaling, perhaps involving electrical or acoustic coordination. If such an organism exists, it would represent a form of collective intelligence operating beyond the node-based neural frameworks common in higher animals. Midnight Zone predators remain some of the most mysterious entities within the region. One such predator, identified through drastic reductions in bioluminescent activity, appears to hunt by suppressing light. Deep-sea surveys show sudden regions of absolute darkness appearing within fields of bioluminescent plankton. These dark patches expand and contract, moving across the environment like drifting shadows. Sensors reveal no change in water composition or pressure, only a complete absence of bioluminescent emission within the affected region. The phenomenon has been attributed to a predator capable of emitting a biochemical agent or electromagnetic field that inhibits luminescent reactions. In doing so, it erases the visibility of prey, allowing it to approach unnoticed. Such a strategy would be uniquely suited to the Midnight Zone, where light, though scarce, serves as the primary means of communication, attraction, and defense for many species. By nullifying this mechanism, the predator effectively controls the sensory landscape of the deep. Further evidence of predatory sophistication emerged when sonar detected a rapid decline in small organism density across multiple transects. The declines occurred in symmetrical formations, suggesting coordinated hunting patterns. In several cases, the missing biomass reappeared later in regions hundreds of meters away, regrouped in tightly compressed clusters as if corralled. This behavior is inconsistent with typical predator-prey interactions. Instead, it suggests the existence of a species capable of manipulating currents to herd prey into concentrated masses. Such tactics imply cognitive capabilities far beyond those of typical deep-sea fauna. Among the most enigmatic creatures observed indirectly is an entity responsible for generating spherical zones of absolute silence regions, where acoustic sensors record no vibrations whatsoever. These zones appear spontaneously and drift through the water with no detectable source. Within them, particles cease to vibrate, currents lose coherence, and even the faint background hum of the ocean disappears. The presence of these silent spheres suggests an organism capable of damping acoustic energy across multiple frequencies, creating pockets of sensory isolation. Whether the spheres serve as camouflage, territory marking, or hunting zones remains unknown. Their mere existence raises questions about the extent to which deep-sea organisms can manipulate physical forces, normally considered immutable in biological contexts. As exploration continues, it becomes clear that the Midnight Zone is not simply a region of darkness populated by isolated anomalies. Instead, it is a coherent ecosystem shaped by organisms that operate on principles alien to surface life. Their existence defies traditional definitions of predator, prey, plant, or animal. They inhabit a world defined by pressure, chemical gradients, and electromagnetic forces, an environment that demands adaptations beyond the reach of terrestrial evolution. The creatures of the Midnight Zone are terrifying not because they are monstrous, but because their existence challenges every assumption about what life can be. They represent branches of evolution shaped by forces invisible to the surface world, life forms born of darkness, operating in silence, integrated into the slow geological pulse of the planet. The deeper expeditions go, the more it becomes clear that humanity has only just begun to uncover the forms that inhabit these depths. As research extended into deeper regions of the Midnight Zone, investigators began to recognize patterns suggesting that the creatures inhabiting these depths existed not in isolation, but as components of a vast, interdependent biome. Each organism, however bizarre or biologically unprecedented, appeared to influence the surrounding environment in ways that reverberated across entire ecological corridors. These influences were subtle, often detectable only through long-term environmental monitoring, yet they revealed a complex network of interactions that extended far beyond conventional predator-prey relationships. The Midnight Zone, long considered a barren expanse, revealed itself as an intricate lattice of adaptive strategies woven into the planet's deep time processes. One of the first indications of broader ecological integration came from the analysis of deep ocean chemical cycles. Researchers documented periodic fluctuations in dissolved organic carbon levels that could not be explained by known biological activity. These fluctuations involved rapid consumption followed by gradual reconstitution cycles that repeated with remarkable consistency across multiple basins. The consumption rates exceeded what microbial communities could produce, implying the involvement of a larger organism capable of metabolizing vast quantities of organic material. This led to the identification of a species tentatively termed the abyssal aperture entity. Although never visually documented, its presence was inferred through sudden, localized reductions in dissolved carbon that followed circular paths across the seafloor. The size of these carbon depletion zones suggested an organism capable of creating suction-like forces across tens of meters. These forces drew organic particles, planktonic debris, and microbial mats into a central region where they disappeared completely. The absence of any physical residue indicated a metabolic process efficient enough to assimilate organic matter without trace. The mechanism behind these suction forces remains speculative. Some models propose the existence of an enormous internal cavity capable of rapid pressurization and decompression. By cycling pressure through this cavity, the organism could draw water inward at high velocity. Others suggest a bioelectric mechanism that alters local density or ion distribution, creating temporary gravitational-like gradients that pull matter inward. Regardless of mechanism, the organism represents a form of mass harvesting previously unknown in marine ecosystems. Simultaneously, deep-sea thermal arrays recorded enigmatic temperature inversions across regions associated with bioluminescent plankton blooms. These blooms, normally stable in the midnight zone's perpetual darkness, showed abrupt collapses coinciding with the arrival of an organism whose existence is known only through thermal disruption. The creature's thermal signature suggested an internal temperature far higher than that typical of deep-sea species approaching levels consistent with hydrothermal vent environments. This organism, often referred to as the thermal divergence form, appears capable of regulating its internal heat independently of ambient water temperature. Its presence generates transient pockets of warm water, disrupting microbial colonies and planktonic groups. The sudden temperature spikes cause mass die-offs in surrounding communities, leaving behind nutrient-rich particulate matter. This behavior suggests a feeding strategy based not on consumption of organisms directly, but on inducing thermal shock to break down biological structures. The organism then absorbs the resulting particle slurry, harvesting nutrients at a chemical level. The existence of such metabolic thermoregulation raises profound questions about energy sourcing. If the creature can produce internal heat without vent proximity, it may possess a biochemical engine driven by chemosynthetic fuel cycles previously undocumented in complex organisms. This engine could involve catalytic mineral cores or electrochemical gradients maintained through metallic ions absorbed from vent systems. Alongside these revelations came evidence of creatures whose influence extended not through chemical or thermal manipulation, but through alterations in the physical structure of the environment itself. One such species, identified through high-resolution bathymetric scans, reshaped the seafloor into enormous labyrinth-like formations. These formations, sprawling networks of ridges and trenches, appeared too precise to be geological. They followed patterns reminiscent of fractal geometry, forming self-similar spirals that extended for kilometers. Subsequent analysis revealed that the structures originated from massive, slow-moving organisms that burrowed through sediment in deliberate, repeating patterns. These abyssal geometric restructurers altered sediment density, redistributed mineral layers, and created channels capable of guiding deep currents. Over time, their movements appeared to influence sediment drift and particulate flow, possibly shaping the long-term evolution of benthic ecosystems. Some researchers hypothesized that these organisms were not feeding in the traditional sense, but modifying the environment to cultivate microbial colonies for future harvesting. Evidence suggested that these creatures navigated according to chemical gradients associated with rare metallic compounds. They followed these gradients across the seafloor, leaving behind networks that influenced both the distribution of food sources and the flow of nutrients essential for chemosynthetic life. Meanwhile, further research uncovered a category of organisms that engaged not in physical, thermal, or chemical manipulation, but in sensory interference. These creatures, known colloquially as veil emitters, produced fields of electromagnetic noise that disrupted sonar, optical sensors, and long-range communication systems. The interference manifested as swirling bands of static that propagated through the water in slow, spiraling waves. The veil emitters remained invisible to cameras, but acoustic mapping revealed shifting shapes embedded within the electromagnetic noise. These entities appeared to rely on sensory suppression as a defensive strategy, masking their presence by overwhelming detection systems. In regions where veil emitters were suspected, deep-sea vehicles often experienced instrument blackouts, directional loss, or distorted telemetry. The interference was not random. It showed rhythmic patterns consistent with biological modulation. Some researchers proposed that the creatures communicated through these patterns, forming a distributed sensory network across broad distances. Such organisms hinted at a form of biological information sharing using electromagnetic emissions, a phenomenon previously unknown in marine life. Parallel investigations uncovered another layer of complexity. Creatures that existed at the threshold of the midnight zone capable of ascending into shallower waters without suffering structural failure. These transitional morphotypes displayed extraordinary flexibility, altering their density and internal composition according to depth. Their bodies expanded or contracted in response to pressure differentials, allowing them to shift between ecological zones. This adaptability suggested a life cycle spanning multiple pressure environments, possibly involving reproductive or migratory phases requiring transitions across thousands of vertical meters. Some transitional morphotypes exhibited behaviors resembling atmospheric ballooning, rapid vertical ascents powered by internal gas release. Others appeared to climb pressure gradients slowly, maintaining equilibrium through controlled biochemical adjustments. Their existence blurred the boundaries between distinct oceanic zones, bridging ecosystems once thought to be isolated. Yet the most unsettling discovery involved organisms that manipulated time-dependent processes rather than static environmental conditions. Long-term monitoring revealed periodic disruptions in the growth cycles of microbial mats, plankton blooms, and sediment layering rates. These disruptions aligned with the passage of certain unidentified organisms whose influence extended over months rather than hours. These species generated pulses of chemical and acoustic energy that altered the growth rates of surrounding biota. In some regions, mats proliferated rapidly following an organism's passage. In others, they collapsed entirely. The species responsible, referred to collectively as temporal modulators, appeared to shape ecological processes through long-duration influence. Their presence suggested an understanding of, or at least adaptation to, biological rhythms on scales measured in seasons or geological cycles. These organisms may be among the Midnight Zone's oldest inhabitants, evolving in tandem with slow shifts in ocean chemistry and pressure gradients. Across all categories, one interconnected pattern emerged. The creatures of the Midnight Zone exerted influence, not through aggression, but through environmental mastery. They shaped chemical gradients, directed current flows, manipulated sensory inputs, and altered the physical landscape. Each species represented a strategic adaptation to extreme conditions, but collectively they formed a balanced system governed by deep time cycles. This perspective transformed the Midnight Zone from a passive environment populated by isolated anomalies into an active biosphere governed by complex interactions. It suggested that humanity had underestimated not just the diversity of life, but the scope of biological influence in deep oceanic systems. The terrifying nature of these creatures lay not in overt hostility, but in their mastery of an environment fundamentally incompatible with human life. Their existence demonstrated that life could evolve not only alongside geological forces, but intertwined with them, adapting to darkness, pressure, and silence, until it became inseparable from the abyss itself. And each discovery made it clear that many more organisms remained undetected, hidden within the vast, uncharted expanse of the Midnight Zone. As the analytical frameworks expanded to include chemical modeling, hydrodynamics, electromagnetic behavior, and long-term geological observations, it became increasingly apparent that the Midnight Zone supported a vast network of organisms whose interactions operated on principles far removed from any ecosystem observed in the upper ocean. These creatures did not merely survive under crushing pressure and perpetual darkness, they shaped, regulated, and reinforced the very architecture of their environment. One of the most revealing discoveries emerged from an extended survey of deep-sea particulate drift. Autonomous vehicles deployed across multiple basins recorded anomalies in sediment suspension that correlated with previously undocumented gravitational fluctuations. The fluctuations were subtle, far too faint to register on conventional instruments, but they revealed a repeating pattern synchronized with the movements of a massive, unidentified organism. This creature, known only through indirect evidence, demonstrated the ability to manipulate particulate matter across hundreds of meters. Its passage generated gravitational microdistortions that caused particles to behave as though drawn into invisible vortices. Such behavior could not be explained through hydrodynamics alone. Some researchers proposed that the organism possessed dense internal structures capable of compressing its mass into temporary high-density configurations, essentially forming biological anchors capable of influencing nearby. particulate fields. Others theorized the presence of internal mineral cores that altered local gravitational properties. Regardless of the mechanism, the organism's influence extended far beyond typical biological interactions. It shaped sediment flow at scales comparable to slow geological processes, suggesting a complex life cycle intertwined with the physical evolution of the seafloor. Parallel investigations uncovered an entirely different class of midnight zone species, bioluminescent architects capable of constructing stable, long-lived light structures that persisted for minutes or even hours after formation. These luminal sculptors generated organized, three-dimensional arrays of millimeter-scale bioluminescent nodes held in place by electrochemical fields. The arrays formed geometric constructs, grids, helices, spirals, that remained suspended in open water without drifting. The patterns were not random. Their symmetry suggested functional purpose, possibly related to communication, navigation, or the mapping of chemical gradients. Under certain conditions, the nodes synchronized their luminosity, producing pulsed waves of light that propagated outward like expanding ripples. Remote probes recorded instances in which multiple sculptors formed overlapping arrays, combining their constructs into distributed lattices spanning dozens of meters. Such structures resembled temporary biological instrumentation, capable of sampling environmental conditions across a broad radius and transmitting the results through patterned luminescence. The lattices dissolved only when disrupted by a passing organism or when their internal chemical gradients decayed. Another group of organisms operated not through physical or electromagnetic constructs, but through biochemical diffusion patterns that altered the sensory environment of surrounding species. These chemical shadow forms produced molecular gradients that interfered with the chemosensory capabilities of other deep-sea organisms. Their secretions created invisible barriers, regions where chemical signatures were scrambled, inverted, or suppressed entirely. The barriers persisted long after the organism had moved on, indicating the presence of slow-degrading molecular fields. These fields likely served multiple ecological purposes: territory marking, predation suppression, or the creation of safe zones for spawning. In some regions, the presence of persistent shadow fields correlated with areas nearly devoid of scavenger species, implying that the chemical gradients functioned as deterrents against predators. In other regions, shadow fields overlapped with microbial hotspots, suggesting that the organisms cultivated favorable chemical conditions for biological growth. The most distinctive shadow forms identified so far appeared to release complex chains of molecules that interacted with mineral surfaces, binding to metallic ions and altering their solubility. Over time, these interactions produced distinct geochemical signatures within sediment cores, allowing researchers to trace the shadow form's migratory routes across centuries. A particularly enigmatic species revealed itself through disruptions in long-range acoustic resonance. Deep-sea seismic networks detected periodic dampening of natural resonance frequencies occurring across multiple basins. This dampening aligned with the appearance of pressure anomalies that propagated through the water column in concentric spheres. These anomalies resembled acoustic voids regions where sound waves lost coherence and dissolved into noise. The organism responsible, known as the resonance nullifier, appeared to manipulate acoustic energy not by generating counter-frequencies, but by absorbing sound outright. Its existence was inferred from the sudden disappearance of natural ambient noise in regions spanning up to several kilometers. The absorptive behavior suggested tissues capable of converting acoustic energy into biochemical or electrochemical reactions. Over time, these regions developed distinct patterns of species absence, as organisms dependent on sound-based communication avoided the null zones. The implications were profound. A biological entity capable not only of silencing the environment, but of shaping the distribution and behavior of other species through sensory deprivation. Within the deepest parts of the midnight zone, where pressure exceeds levels compatible with nearly all known organisms, researchers detected organisms that functioned as symbiotic systems rather than individual life forms. These aggregate entities behaved as modular organisms composed of numerous subunits, each subunit a small organism with its own metabolic functions. the subunits clustered together into massive colony-scale structures capable of coordinated movement and environmental manipulation. The aggregate's internal communication appeared to rely on electrical impulses transmitted through conductive tissue networks. This allowed the colony to behave as a single organism while retaining the ability to fragment and reassemble. When environmental conditions changed abruptly, such as sudden shifts in temperature or pressure, the aggregate restructured its components to optimize survival. Some clusters formed protective shells, while others extended filamentous arms to extract nutrients from sediment layers. The adaptation strategy resembled highly advanced swarm intelligence systems, though entirely biological in origin. As deeper investigations progressed, evidence emerged of organisms that operated at the limits of biological possibility. One such species, referred to as the midnight cycler, interacted directly with the Earth's magnetic field. Over time, changes in the cycler's movement corresponded with fluctuations in geomagnetic intensity. These correlations suggested that the organism navigated using magnetic cues, possibly relying on specialized magnetoreceptive tissues composed of aligned metallic particles. But more intriguingly, prolonged recordings suggested that the cycler influenced magnetic fields rather than merely responding to them. Its presence created localized distortions detectable by satellite magnetometers. The distortions followed the cycler's path as it traversed different basins, forming faint magnetic trails that remained for days or weeks. The phenomenon implied a biological capacity for magnetic manipulation, a capability never observed in complex marine organisms. This raised the possibility that the cycler used magnetic perturbation as a form of communication or environmental modification, altering deep ocean navigation cues for itself or for other species. The complexity of midnight zone organisms reached an apex with the identification of a class known as deep continuum forms, entities so large and slow-moving that they bordered on geological structures. These creatures, inferred through combined seismic, chemical, and acoustic interactions, occupied territories spanning multiple kilometers. They moved over timescales measured in months or years, altering sediment layers, consuming mineral deposits, and shaping the topography through gradual mass displacement. Continuum forms appeared to be integrated into the seafloor itself, with portions of their bodies embedded in sediment layers. Their metabolic processes relied on slow chemical cycles driven by pressure and temperature gradients across their immense bodies. Some evidence suggested they served as keystone species, regulating mineral availability for vent ecosystems and influencing long-term patterns of geological activity. The idea of a living organism interacting with geological processes on such scales blurred the boundaries between life and landscape. Continuum forms seemed less like creatures and more like living extensions of the deep ocean biological processes operating on geological timescales. The cumulative picture, painted by these findings, revealed an ecosystem fundamentally distinct from any other known on Earth. As monitoring technologies improved and the midnight zone's biological signatures accumulated across global data repositories, the emerging patterns suggested a broader, more cohesive truth. The creatures dwelling in the deep were not anomalies scattered through an uninhabitable world. They formed a system, an ecological architecture spanning continents and ages, evolving in tandem with forces normally associated with the planet's interior. The deeper the evidence reached, the clearer it became that the midnight zone served as a massive, interconnected biological engine operating beneath humanity's awareness. The revelation began when gravimetric sensors recorded low-frequency undulations across multiple ocean basins over the course of several months. These undulations were not tectonic. They lacked the sharp edges characteristic of geological activity. Instead, they exhibited slow, rhythmic oscillations consistent with biomass movement. Their amplitude varied in a pattern, suggesting the passage of extremely large organisms, entities so vast that their displacement registered on instruments designed to detect shifts in the Earth's crust. These undulations aligned with earlier evidence of the deep continuum forms, but on a much larger scale. What had been considered isolated individuals now appeared to be components of a coordinated cycle. The oscillations originated in the deepest trenches before propagating outward toward mid-ocean ridges, then reversing direction in sweeping arcs. The motion traced a planetary-scale migration, one not measured in kilometers or days, but in thousands of kilometers and seasons measured by slow geochemical drift. Chemical sensors detected corresponding shifts in dissolved metals and organic compounds. These shifts spread through the water column in waves, each wave reflecting the movement of a vast organism or group of organisms. As these waves passed, sediment layering rates changed, microbial blooms expanded or collapsed, and current patterns subtly altered. These were not chaotic disturbances. They followed an organized cyclical progression, suggesting biological regulation rather than random coincidence. This cycle became the key to understanding the Midnight Zone's ecosystem. It appeared that many of the terrifying species documented earlier resonance nullifiers, abyssal aperture entities, luminol sculptors, chemical shadow forms, and others did not exist as isolated adaptations. Instead, they contributed to an environmental symphony in which each organism occupied a functional niche. Together, these species formed a complex feedback system that aligned with long-term tectonic processes. The Midnight Zone's ecosystem was not a passive biome carved by geological forces, it was a biome that shaped them. Evidence for this came from the largest anomaly yet recorded. Instruments stationed near a major subduction zone detected a slow, immense displacement of water, accompanied by synchronous changes in magnetic fields and pressure gradients. These changes formed a distinct wave pattern, a rolling cascade that traveled across the trench before ascending vertically in a broad dome-like formation. It rose hundreds of meters before dispersing into diffuse currents. The only explanation consistent with the data was the coordinated ascent of an organism so large and dispersed that it behaved as an environmental phenomenon rather than a discrete biological unit. Its ascent triggered cascading changes throughout the surrounding environment. Sediment lifted in drifting plumes, chemical gradients inverted across vast distances, and the usual ambient hum of deep-sea acoustics disappeared entirely. Hydrophones recorded a long, sustained acoustic absence, an event in which natural resonance in the Midnight Zone fell to zero. No known physical process could produce such a void without causing catastrophic pressure collapse. The only plausible model required a biological structure capable of absorbing or dissipating acoustic energy more efficiently than any engineered material. This acoustic void lasted several minutes before releasing a low, slow oscillation resembling a planetary heartbeat. The oscillation propagated across the basin, interacting with the environment in ways that defied simple categorization. In certain regions, it stimulated microbial blooms. In others, it collapsed them. Some vent systems surged with new mineral-rich plumes, others temporarily diminished. The effect resembled a reset, a synchronized rebalancing of deep ocean biochemistry. For the first time, researchers considered the possibility that the Midnight Zone's organisms participated not only in ecological regulation but in planetary maintenance. Their patterns mirrored Earth's internal cycles of heat flow, mineral convection, and chemical exchange. Over eons, these creatures may have adapted to function as biological stabilizers, entities whose existence smoothed extremes, redistributed resources, and maintained equilibrium in an environment where geological processes alone produced chaotic outcomes. The implications stretched beyond marine biology. They entered the domain of planetary science. If true, life in the deep ocean had evolved not merely to survive geological forces, but to co-evolve with them, integrating biological processes with the planet's internal machinery. Supporting evidence emerged when seismographs detected micro-vibrations preceding tectonic activity. These vibrations matched patterns previously attributed to deep-dwelling organisms. After major shifts, the same vibrations appeared again, this time trailing the seismic event, as if following a natural reaction cycle. In several cases, minor seismic adjustments occurred shortly after the organism's signals, reducing strain before larger quakes could form. This raised a remarkable possibility. The creatures of the Midnight Zone were not just reacting to tectonic events. They were mitigating them. By redistributing sediment, equalizing pressure gradients, and altering thermal flow, these organisms may have played a subtle, stabilizing role in the long-term evolution of the ocean floor. Their activities would have minimal impact on large-scale tectonics, but could significantly reduce local instabilities, smoothing the violent extremes of a constantly shifting planet. Viewed in this light, the Midnight Zone's terrifying creatures ceased to be aberrations. They became essential components of a planet-wide regulatory system. Such a revelation demanded a re-evaluation of the deep ocean's significance. The Midnight Zone was not merely the largest biome on Earth, it might be the one most tightly integrated into the planet's long-term stability. Yet the most profound discovery came last. While analyzing long-duration acoustic logs, researchers detected a recurring pattern, an ancient cycle repeating every several centuries. Embedded in the noise were low, harmonic pulses identical to those associated with the largest organisms. These pulses matched readings from sediment cores dating hundreds of thousands of years. The waveform patterns remained consistent over geological time. This meant the Midnight Zone's ecosystem had existed, unchanged in principle, for longer than any surface ecosystem. Its creatures had survived multiple extinction events, climatic shifts, magnetic reversals, and oceanic reconfigurations. They persisted because their survival was tied not to volatile surface conditions, but to the slow, stable rhythms of planetary geology. In this sense, they were the Earth's oldest guardians, living archives of ancient environmental processes, maintaining continuity in a world where surface life rose and fell repeatedly. The final conclusion of the Midnight Zone study was simple, yet vast in implication. The terrifying creatures of the deep are not nightmares of the abyss. They are the planet's most ancient engineers. Their forms may be unsettling, their behaviors alien, their presence overwhelming, but their existence reveals that life in the deepest dark is not a deviation from nature, it is its foundation. We upload new videos every single day, so make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss what's next. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, it really helps the channel grow. Tell us in the comments what you'd like to see next, your ideas might be in our next upload. Thank you so much for watching and for being part of our community. Stay tuned, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next video.